Hey, I'm Chris Januszewski, and welcome to the Rebellious Times Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to have Ryan Young, CEO of CoreTech, on the call. Ryan Young is an expert in critical network infrastructure and has some really incredible insights into optical networking and the industry as a whole and how it's kind of been impacted and blowing up based on the AI revolution we're experiencing. How are you doing, Ryan? Nice to see you.
Doing great, Chris. Thanks for having me on today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on. And we were talking about your background there that we can get a peek of behind you. So you're in New York, right? Tell us a little bit about that background and what you get to see every day.
Yeah. Well, I'm in Brooklyn, New York. Behind me, you can see the great skyline of Manhattan. And so I've been in Brooklyn since 2001. So have watched this area, which is called Williamsburg, Brooklyn, just expand and change over time. When we moved here, it was like a field, and now there's all of these high-rise buildings. So it's been a big change here in Brooklyn, but that's kind of been reminiscent of what's happened in New York City over the last 25 years, as the city itself has changed pretty dramatically, right, for the better. And so the boats, you'll see a boat every now and then come through. You'll see different things cross through as we're having a conversation. So hopefully it won't be distracting for the viewers, but it's a fun optic, I think, for a podcast like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was saying to you before the show that I was always obsessed with the US as a kid and kind of ended up in the US, came over from England, and it was New York that was the dream. And my mum brought home a postcard from her trip, and I had it on my desk at work for years, and maybe that manifested into me getting over into the US. I've been to New York on work trips. I've never lived there, but one thing I recall is a friend of mine he took me to Brooklyn. Wanted to go to his favorite Thai restaurant, and there are two things I remember from that. One, there was a man walking around with about 20 dogs on a leash in front of him. So
that's right. Yeah, that's a common scene here in the city.
That's a common scene. And the other one is we drove around literally for an hour to try and find a parking spot to go to this Thai restaurant.
That's about right too. Yeah, those both check. And every now and then they try to pass something that will create a big garage, and of course it gets shot down and killed pretty quickly by the by the neighborhood associations, of course, because they love their parking challenges here in New York City for sure.
I bet. Brilliant. Right. Well, let's get into it a little bit here. I'd love to start with your journey of kind of how you got to where you've been running CoreTech and having such a fantastic business.
Yeah, well, I mean, how I got to CoreTech is really kind of how I got into tech to a certain degree, without going too long in the tooth on it. I was born and raised in the great city of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Spent most of my time there. Started out actually in television production. Was involved in cable access and then regional cable and some paid cable shows where I hosted a talk show, built a production company, and enjoyed it thoroughly. Thought that was my destiny. That was my pathway. So thought I would be the next Jim Nance in some capacities as a sports announcer in there. And I think it was, somewhere around the late 1990s, I'd gotten involved in a tech startup. Production is tough. It's certainly trying to build your own production company in a world dominated by big commercial brands. This is before the internet, so you couldn't just start your own YouTube channel and do things like you're doing right now on the podcast. And so anyways, long story short, I get in a startup. I start traveling to the East Coast. It's a national startup. Start traveling around the country. My wife, who is graduating from the University of Minnesota, going to portfolio schools in advertising, she decides she wants to come out to New York, which is the mecca for advertising. I say, okay, good luck, and start visiting her in New York. And then sooner than later, fell in love with the city. And that was really how I got into tech. And so I came out to New York City. I got my first job in tech working in a small little warehouse in Queens where we were selling network infrastructure equipment. Within 5 years, I left there to found a network infrastructure company focused around Juniper. 8 years later, we sold that company. In the process of selling that, before we sold that company in 2013, we were looking at optical as an extension of layer 2 and 3 routing and switching. And so we had subcontracted with a small little company based out of Minnesota, where I was from, with a CTO there who was expert in optical engineering. And we needed optical engineering. It was a thing. Fiber was starting to be laid to communities. They were trying to connect all these rural communities. This was the BEAD funding under the Obama era in 2008, which ran through 2012, essentially. There was NTIA funding, which was transportation. There was RUS, which is rural funding. So all of these were funding the ability to get internet access out to the common person to make the U.S. economy competitive. And so they were funding the digging of trenches and the laying of fiber. And so a lot of projects started to include optical. So we looked at this company. We liked the company. We realized it was a little bit of a different skill set that we had at the time, really focused primarily around Cisco as opposed to Juniper. And so rather than bring it in-house, we just funded it. Me and another partner at the old firm put up the money for the company. We bought out the assets, started the company, renamed it Kore-Tek, and that was 2011. And off we went running for the races. And here we are, wow, I hate to say, almost 15 years later.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for giving us the condensed version there. So let's talk a little bit about optical networking. What were
Sure.
these companies doing before they were using optical? What kind of projects does your team work on, and kind of how does it impact the technology space?
Yeah, good question. So, optical has been around for a long time, right? Optical was originally copper. It became fiber. Obviously, back in kind of the 70s. If you go back to some old companies that existed in the space, some of the kind of founding fathers of the space, companies like ADC Telecom, which is ironically a Minnesota company, they basically were responsible for developing what was basically pushing light over fiber, right? Light. And a lot of that was driven by Cold War era espionage techniques that were taking place around the world, where they had basically copper throughout all of these embassies, and they were realizing that copper was able to transmit, sound and vibration. And from the sound and vibration, you could basically hack what was being said. And so it then moved into this era where, really the federal government and others, the private industry, decided there needed to be a better way to do it. The other way to communicate around the world was through satellites, but satellites weren't as common as they are today, obviously, and even more common now in the last 5 years because of companies, like Starlink, that are putting up a massive amounts of lower geo satellites. And so what ends up happening is fiber gets laid, fiber starts to get put in. It becomes a great way to move data. You can move data at high speeds. However, you're constrained by how fast the network can actually do it. And so in the early days, you're moving traffic at not even gig speed, right? Dial-up type speeds. As time goes on, technology gets faster, technology gets better. Then in comes all this government funding to build out these new fiber routes. Next thing you know, you got all of this fiber rich. And companies like Level 3 were laying fiber on the sides of these railroad tracks as a physical construction company, over the last 50 years. And so then you end up with all these routes, but these routes are not lit up. They're not utilized as dark fiber. So what happens in kind of late 2010s, early 2010s, late 2008, 2006 through say 2015, is everybody starts to get into network infrastructure as a way to be able to move everything through IP. And as IP comes really big, and now you can start to do these big routing. And up until now, routers were the size of refrigerators, and you had to have big switching closets and the network was separated, and all the OSI models required massive amounts of equipment. And so only a few people could do it. As the equipment came down in footprint, as it came down in power consumption, and it came down in cost, what ends up happening now is you get the ability to start to move this data at better speeds. And so optical really starts to take on its own life. You also have all this public funding coming in and private funding to build it out. You also have the smartphone, right? So the smartphone wants to move data to the edge, right? So workloads are being pushed out to the edge of the network. And in order to do that, you have to have applications that run, and the applications need to run from data center to data center, right? Out of core data centers and interconnected through other data centers. So you need data center interconnection, DCI. So all of a sudden, this era hits where now everybody realizes we need the speed inside of that network at that layer 1 level, and they start to invest in optical. And that takes place for about, up until about 2016, 2017, when the movement starts to shift slightly then to, well, maybe we can do this over routing or over switching. It just depends on what manufacturer you want to follow. So you could call it, as I segue through that, what I missed was a key component. The other problem with fiber was that fiber in the early days was run off sonnet rings, right? So it was a quintessential ring. Virtually a ring would surround a city, go through the city, and that's how it would move. Well, then DWDM becomes the pathway of choice, and now you can switch fiber very quickly and move it from point to point as you want to move it. Well, then as we get back to the 2015 plus, and they start looking at IP over DWDM, routed optical networks, optical switch networks, what becomes the challenge now is now you can do it under different protocols at routing levels or at switching levels. But you still have the physical fiber. You still need to send and transmit over the fiber, but now you can start to do it over an optic. So, well, that sounds great. Lowers the footprint even more, takes away even a component within the network in some capacity or in some cases, and more fibers being laid, more and more bandwidths being chewed up. And then all of a sudden COVID hits and everybody goes remote. And now you got to push everything out to the edge. And now everybody that does anything for 2 or 3 years is going to do it all remote. And now these networks need to be able to operate, and they need to be upgraded with newer protocols and newer applications that can run at speed. And that carries through all the way till we get to today, when then about a year ago, the craze for AI kicks in. And I know we're going to talk about that separately, but then AI comes in and changes it again and makes the optical even much more critical now to network operations.
Thank you. And on the AI front, we hear and we read a lot about how AI is massively increasing the processing power that's needed, and there's a huge increase in data that's needed to be transmitted, and all our energy bills are going to go up because these data centers are going to be pulling up all the energy. So we all need solar panels apparently. Um, how is the optical network infrastructure keeping up from a capacity perspective? Is this going to be a kind of a bottleneck, or is this something that's fairly scalable on an industry perspective?
Well, really now is the second coming of optical. So the first coming was when it was Sonnet back in, the 90s and early 2000s. Then the second coming was when it kind of went to DWDM. And now the third coming is now, because you need those connections between those data centers, those DCIs, to be at high speeds. The other challenge that you have is you also need all the applications and everything to run, in some cases at the edge, back to core data centers. So now the need for speed is there, right? For my AI cluster to work properly. And the folks that were kind of, I don't know if the industry experts would agree with this entirely, but the way that I always correlate it is back in kind of the early 2010s, there was a race for high frequency trading, dark pool networks that were in Wall Street that kind of changed the way Wall Street traded. It got in and out of trades in microseconds, basically, and wrote algorithms to be able to do that, right? Knowing what markets would be affected downstream. Well, that's now carrying itself over into AI, but those are data centers with AI, taps that are at the edge that are communicating with each other. And you need to communicate with a variety of data centers and a variety of applications in those data centers. And of course, you need to build your AI cluster or your AI data center, and then have that operate. And so what happens now is the need for speed has to happen for all of that to take place at line rate. And line rate, up until a few years ago, was, in theory, at the compute level, with inside the servers and the compute capabilities, you could run about 1.2 terabit in speed off the ASICs. The challenge was the network was only 40 gig or 10 gig or 100 gig or 200 gig. Well, now we're starting to see the 800 gigs, the 400 gigs, and even the 1.2 terabit optics come out now that will run at line rate. So now your quantum computing, your quantum data centers, your quantum AI, all of that stuff can now run at the same level that it would run internally in its own processing power. And so now the network becomes strategic again, because you want to be able to take advantage of that, and it allows you to move quicker, but also beat the competitors in a lot of ways at getting that data faster and having it move quicker.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And in terms of geographical, obviously, I imagine it's fairly straightforward to lay. Well, straightforward. I don't know how straightforward it is, but you can lay a cable from one city to another and pass parcels of data over, right? What about long distance? What about from continent to continent? How does the infrastructure work there?
Yeah, so it's again, there's only two ways to really pass this data, right? It's going to be satellite, right? Really VSAT, or it's going to be optical. And so, in the last year, there's about 130 plus brand new subsea pipes that are being laid down, that are being funded around the globe, and that is to create those interconnections between the continents. And so, optical again is in the same capacity that you're running. Obviously, those are going to be long haul routes, right? And so long haul is different. So a lot of what we're talking about today so far has been metro. It's really within like a ring within a city or within a region or within geographic, like North America. And you start getting into long haul routes across the Atlantic or the Pacific, or even down into South America. You need different equipment and different optics to push it. But again, there's where the need for speed and the need for latency to not be there kicks into play. And so you want that network to be able to run at a low latency, high speed capacity, and that's what's happening. And so again, it's the second coming of network infrastructure. It was distracted for a while there by the need for security, right? Security is still one of the biggest challenges that we face day to day, but it really became a focus point of investment, really from kind of like 2013 until 2021, 22. It was all about security, and the network was kind of, well, we need a network, but we don't really need a network. The other thing that changed slightly, and this is true with the long haul as well, with those subsea networks, is as you get more bandwidth, so as I need 200 or 400 or 800 gig, I no longer, uh, it's no longer the economy of scale for me to use a service provider starts to go away. It's cheaper for me as Google to believe it or not, to lay my own subsea pipes point to point and even sell off fractions of that or keep it all for myself and recoup that cost, in an ROI over 4, 5, or 10 years, as opposed to trying to pay that one BT Telecom or whatever carrier that might be that's running across the across Atlantic run, to pay them the millions and millions of dollars a month, particularly when you start saying, I need 4 or 800 gigs. The other challenge you have within fiber is you can't have all of these 400 gigs sitting next to each other, or you're going to start to have vibration you're going to have to bleed through. And so you have to separate the fiber within the fiber, and you have to separate those strands. And in some cases, you have to run different strands and different levels of bandwidth over those different strands. So it's for all those reasons, it's really become the second coming. Now, I would love to say we knew that 10 years ago. And sometimes it's better to be lucky from being good and being a great company, but it certainly is something now that is top of mind for, as you mentioned earlier, healthcare. It's a big deal for healthcare. They want to connect all of their applications together. They want to be able to do real-time surgeries. They want to be able to share that data. They want to be able to use robotics. The same thing is happening with service providers. The same thing is happening with global financials. And it's even happening now within state and local government, and certainly the federal government. And so basically all these industries now are turning back to saying, we need fiber, and we need higher speed connectivity. The problem is the carriers are there. They're trying to scale as quick as they can. They don't want to lose the business. Folks are realizing it's too expensive unless they build it themselves. And so there's kind of right now a mini arms race of who can get out there and build as much as they possibly can. And the biggest challenge for this segment, as all tech segments are, there's a dwindling amount of people that could do the work, both from the physical trench digging. I mean, you can only run so many boats and so many trench diggers in so many communities. And even with optical engineering and security, there's calling it almost a million person gap right now in the space overall.
Yeah, the logistics of it it sounds mind blowing to me when you said that a company like Google could potentially lay their own undersea cables, and I start to think in my head, okay, so I want a cable going from New York to Southampton or Liverpool, 3,000 miles ish. Somebody has to, well, for this stuff, this thing has to be created, and it has to be laid on an ocean with an uneven floor. And then what if something breaks? Who goes down and fixes it? Yeah, and it's kind of mind blowing that this is even possible.
Well, and what we're seeing now is as you've seen recently in reports, those cables are in some cases being tampered. Um, they're being either attempted to be infiltrated, hacked, if you will, or they're in a situation where they're actually being cut or they're being damaged, and some nefariously, right? And so that's why I think in the most recent administration there was a strong push to recognize satellites as a viable option for the transmission of data, not just fiber. And that changes a little bit. I mean, uh, challenge you always have, and we were involved in a Lockheed program 2 decades ago, to be exact, around space satellites and the deployment of those space satellites. It was really a program that was funded by the federal government, and the challenge is always, that they were up too far. You have you have space disturbance, you have radiation, you have all sorts of cosmic things that can mess with the transmission of that data, and it can't go at higher speeds. And that's really why now, with like what Starlink has done to move that down in the orbit, make that more of a string and create more of that almost mesh network, that almost like a home Wi-Fi where you have 4 or 5 devices in your home to mesh it together and create that as a viable option is really kind of an interesting position. The challenge becomes, again, they can only move so fast. They have atmospheric issues to deal with, and some of these people need to move at speeds that are much beyond what those are capable of doing. But it's a viable option, and it will continue to be one because of the fact that there's susceptibility to physical. The good news is you can't really hack light the same way. You'd have to do it, and I'm not an engineer that would understand every component, but basically stated, you'd have to have an ASIC, or you'd have to have an optic, or you'd have to have a compromised point at some point within the infrastructure or on the OS of whatever's receiving that data, or you'd have to have some kind of filter that would be in that optical cable or that optical line. That would be extremely challenging to do. So the good news is optical is still one of the safest ways to transmit data point to point, especially when it's encrypted. And it's amazing. Most people don't realize that everything that we're doing, including this conference right now, is all taking place on those networks, and it's all built off of an optical backbone.
I'm actually picking up my notes here. I'm making it jolly, but I always like to have a little watch. So thank you. You give us some really interesting insights here into this whole space. I really no experience with that. It's great. So, you're dealing with some big projects here. You put a business that's successful. What about outside of work? Kind of how do you de-stress? How do you kind of step away and keep yourself refreshed and reinvigorated to go again?
That's a good question. I think, like anybody, you try to surround yourself with good family, good friends. I think really, got a daughter. It loves spending time with her. Love spending time with my wife. We try to get out of town, try to get out in nature as much as we possibly can. That's for sure. And obviously, you could see it's even a part of my day to day life in terms of having nature right out the back door. I mean, we might be in what they call in the old days the concrete jungle here in New York City, but it is certainly far from that when you get this experience life by the water in any city or any community. I think that's a big part of it. I certainly, enjoy trying to continue to maintain a healthy lifestyle. I like to try to continue to work out as best I can. Obviously, travel is a big part of it. I travel quite a bit. Probably 40 weeks out of the year, I'm on the road roughly in some capacity. And so trying to find time in those places to enjoy the local culture and community. And then certainly traveling abroad. We've really, as a family, I think, embraced our ability to do that, and our ability to be able to move to different areas and spend time there, and try to take a week or two and really just kind of disconnect and spend time there. And as my dog shakes over here, it's to walk my dog and really try to, keep active and keep my head clear. But it is always a challenge. It's a challenge for founders. It's a challenge for entrepreneurs. It's a challenge for executives. I think that we all share is how do we strike that balance between, work and personal life.
Yeah, absolutely. 40 weeks out of the year traveling, that's a lot. And so it sounds like you make the best of it when you do. And there's another subject that we touched on when we met previously. There's kind of more of a personal subject that you said you might be open to talk about. So you said your daughter has type 1 diabetes. Um, and I'd love you to, as much as you feel comfortable, to kind of share what that experience is like as a parent, and how you deal with that, and how you ensure she has a great life.
Yeah. Well, it's life-changing. Everybody out there that's experienced that or has somebody that, in their family that is type 1, whether it's, a sibling, a parent, a relative, or even a friend, I think it's hard to put into words how much it does really impact your life, day to day initially. Certainly, it's a complete shift. I think, one of the doctors once said it's never out of your face. It kind of moves into your peripheral after a while. And I like to believe now that in some capacities, it's kind of in our peripheral, but it's never out of your vision. It's always there. You're always watching a number. You're always watching the low. You're always, thinking, do you have the snacks with you? Do you, will the technology fail? I mean, technology's come a long way. And so I think there's been generations of people that have had to deal with this in a slightly different capacity. And if you ask them and they looked at how it is today, they would say it's completely different, right? You have pumps that are, almost at least machine learning driven. You have readers that can read and transmit data. People can follow you all over. So it's a different world, but it's still, I think, emotionally it changes a little bit of what you can look at in the world and focus on, right? You know, she bears the burden of having to deal with that on a day-to-day basis, but she's young, so she hasn't we don't want her to have that responsibility. But the other thing is type 1 is not like type 2, and there's a big problem where most people just think, "Oh, it's type 2, you'll outgrow it or you can change your food habits." And type 1 is immensely different. It's completely different. And so I think there's stigmas around what type 1 is and knowledge of what type 1 is versus type 2. But it becomes really how do you also let kids be kids. So at the same time, you don't, right, like you don't run around cautious or trying to limit ice cream or those things that kids want to enjoy. But, it does change. You do sleepover, she does a sleepover, you're somebody's with her, in some capacity. So it never really goes too far away. I think for us, what we've done is we've tried to change that into like, hey, how can we have great experiences with her? How can we try to get her an advantage in other ways, culturally, educationally? I think we look at some of those things as ways to try to counteract that. Don't know if that will work or if that's, I think at the end of the day, we're just parents and our kids will turn out how they turn out. We try to do the best we can and hope that the lessons that we taught and the examples that we've shown will help them become great individuals and contribute to society. And I think it's no different for her, but she just, we just always have to be thinking about a number, a digit, a remediation, or a finger stick if it needs to happen. And that's always a challenge.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And, like you say, technology is improving all the time. So I'm sure over the course of your daughter's life, technology will keep improving, and who knows where we can get to in the future.
I believe so. I think there are even things like JDRF and other T1D1, which are other organizations that really contribute to that we contribute time and energy to, but also that are out there doing it. We're already seeing that. I mean, I think AI is going to change a lot of it, right? I think these pumps. One of the challenges, Chris, is that really insulin itself is only shelf stable for so long. And so you have to change components. So, and you can't deliver glucose because it's sugar and it gets jammed up. So once they can figure out how to do that, then all of a sudden it'd be like the pump could give you a little bit of, give you an up and give you a low and give you, so we can get lows and get her low insulin, but we can't really give the ups, and it can suspend and the body will naturally bring it up, but it won't starve it off. And I think with AI and technology, she's going to have a completely different lifestyle or ability to manage that over the next decade or two for sure.
Sounds like you're doing an amazing job as a parent there. So best wishes for your daughter, and I'm sure she'll do great as time goes on. So
Thank you.
before we clock off here, there's one other subject that I wanted to touch on that I thought was really interesting. Your approach to leadership and helping build leaders within your team. Could you tell me a little bit about how you manage that?
Yeah, so it's interesting because one of the biggest challenges that I think we face as founders and entrepreneurs in whatever business segment you're in is that you tend to be one of the best at what you do in some capacity. And as you try to branch that out and you try to build and grow an organization, you run into bottlenecks, you run into operational inefficiencies because oftentimes the star players want to continue to be the star players. And the big challenge is, how do you become the coach? And then how do you become the owner, right? And the owner is different than the coach, and the coaches are different than the players. And oftentimes where organizations fail is they fail to go and get those outside resources, I think, to help provide those insights and help you take a step back and look at yourself and your organization and your strategies. And so you get to operational, you have the star players who are owners staying in the operations the whole time. You forget to focus on strategy. And strategy is the thing that you can't see, that is going to yield the big results, but it's kind of like faith. You just kind of have to believe in it. The difference is over time, you'll see the results of that strategy. Well, a lot of times end up with people that don't necessarily focus on the strategy, recognize the strategy. So what you have to do is you have to be able to bring in outside resources. So what we've done very successfully is create, board of advisors and bring people into our inner circle at a board level, experts in the industry, experts in customers that we're going after, former customers we used to work with, people that have expertise in areas that have nothing to do with our industry. And by putting all these people together, we almost create a relationship of where there's ownership of a leadership team to this board, even though in some cases the board doesn't have control, if that makes sense. The board, so we end up having to report up to people to them to provide updates on strategy, to provide updates on operations, to provide updates on how we're taking initiatives to move in these directions. But yet, in some capacities, yes, they do have some ownership rights, or they're gaining ownership rights within your organization. But in other cases, they're simply there as like an oversight group that we continue to strive to. And so what ends up happening is you end up putting in front of yourself like a coach, and you're almost building your own jobs and activities you have to do, and you have to almost like sell up. So what happens a lot of times is owners think, well, hey, I don't, I'm the owner, I don't have to do that. But then you fail to continue to grow and evolve because you're not working the strategy, and you're not continuing to work to not sell up, but manage up and operate up, right? And strategize up. And that becomes the issue, because we can all sell ourselves on what we're doing or how good we are or how we can make things happen. But ultimately, you need somebody to hold you accountable for those results and those activities and those successes. And so we try. Sometimes better, sometimes worse than we like to, but we try to do that. And then we try to have that filter down too, where those people can become operationalized when big projects or opportunities or business strategies lift off. Now you've also built a team that really comes in at a leadership level and can now take operational ownership of that group and start running with that. And so you're at the same time you're working toward that strategy, and then you're peeling that off, you're making it operational, you're backfilling that at the strategic level, and then you're moving forward with the team on the operations level. And so now you get scalability within the company, and you try to then take that culture all the way down to, the person that's at the entry level of the company.
Brilliant.
So
Thanks.
that's how we do it. Yeah.
Love it. Yeah, thank you for these insights from a CEO's perspective on how you kind of manage board expectation and separate out, assign time and discipline to the strategic side of the business, which is the bit that helps you grow. Um, well, thanks so much, Ryan. It's been wonderful having you on the show. I hope it stays to be a beautiful day there looking over New York, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for your audience, for everything, and look forward to chatting again. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.